Hello, everyone. In this video, we'll be working on our competency check called Assessing Excel Training Needs, specifically steps 1 through 6. And just a quick reminder, we have an organization that sent out an online survey through a popular survey application called Qualtrics. In this survey, employees are asked how comfortable they are with different tasks in Microsoft Excel. So the employees completed the survey, and what we're looking at here is an exported file from that survey software. So this is what you would be working on if you were ever tasked with managing survey data within a company, right? And today we're specifically working on the first 6 steps of our task sheet. Step 1 was to download the data set. If you're here, that means that you have the right data set. So make sure you have the data set open. And when you download that data set, this is what you should see. Now, your exact data might look a little bit different from mine since I tend to update the data for each class. But either way, the purpose of this video is to sort of walk you through the basic assignment steps for this competency check. So step 2 is to save the file to your computer, and you'll want to make sure that you can save this file somewhere that you can access it in the future. If you just go to File and Save, or click on the little Save button. But again, make sure that you save this somewhere that you can access it in the future, because as you're working through the tasks, when you're finished, you'll want to upload your saved completed file to the class website. And also, I would just recommend saving this file multiple times throughout the journey, right? Every couple of steps, generally save the file, just in case there is some sort of issue, if your computer crashes or your battery dies or something happens, you won't have to start from scratch. You can go back to your last saved file. So this is what the Excel file looks like. And let me just explain what's going on here. The data is grouped in columns, and each column represents some bit of information that the survey system has captured. At the left of the screen, we see that most of these early columns are just tracking data. It tracks things like when the survey started, when it ended, how long it took, whether the survey was finished or not. This is all just tracking data, and this is messy. And by the way, it's purposefully messy, right? I made a messy data sheet because, well, first of all, this is exactly what this survey software spits out. I haven't touched it at all, except for one thing that I'll mention in a second here. Um, and so a lot of times the very first step of data analysis is cleaning up the mess, right? And so what we're going to be doing here is taking all of this irrelevant stuff, all of this sort of mess, and getting rid of it, or just sort of cleaning it in such a way that it's very easy for us to work with the data that we're interested in. And also so it's easy for us to share that data with others without them looking at this and saying, I have no idea what's going on, right? But again, on the left-hand side, we see a bunch of columns. This columns is all tracking information. And then on the right-hand side, we get to the actual survey information. So there's this name column, and the name column represents the name of the person who completed the survey. And then there are 14 columns that capture different survey responses. Each of these columns is a different item on the survey, right? Now, the rows represent survey completions. So this row here represents a survey that was completed by Stanley Hudson, right? Now, I mentioned that I did make one change to this data file before I uploaded it for you all, and that is this data is actual data based on students who completed a survey on their Excel skills. I just anonymized the data by taking the students' names out and putting random names of random characters from the office in here. So we see Jim Halpert, we see who else? Michael Scott, right? Dwight Schrute. So if you took the survey, you are one of these characters, right? But again, what we can see is this row number 4 represents Stanley Hudson, and each of the columns represents Stanley's responses to different items in the survey. So this particular item in column S asked, how comfortable would you be sorting columns? And when Stanley took the survey, he said that would be a piece of cake, right? There was another column that said, how comfortable would you be recoding variables into the same column? And when he took the survey, Stanley said, I could probably handle this. Okay, so here we have the rows are different employee responses, the columns are different data, different bits of information, and the individual cells represent an employee's response on that bit of information. right? And so what we're going to be doing, and I'll also mention here with Microsoft Excel, this file that we have represents a workbook, okay? And a workbook has multiple sheets or worksheets. Here we can see at the bottom left-hand corner that our workbook has two different worksheets. Right now, we're looking at a worksheet called Excel Comfort Dataset, and this worksheet represents that raw survey data. There's another worksheet called Data Labels, and if we just click on this tab here, we can go to that particular worksheet, and here we can see, since we've changed sheets, we have a completely different set of data, right? The Data Labels worksheet tells us what those different data labels on our data set mean, right? So let me just walk through this stuff real quick. The first three data labels were generated by the survey software. And these data labels here correspond with the first three rows in our Excel Comfort data set, these first three rows here. So I'll just give you an example. There was a data label called start date. It had a survey item named start date, and it has this random sort of, I don't know, I can't really make sense of this, but a whole bunch of text, right, related to that particular data label. So we have start date, text, right? And we go to our Excel Comfort Dataset workbook or worksheet. We can see in the first column, start date, that string of text, right? And so those first three columns here were generated by Qualtrics. The fourth column I created, and that tells us what we're going to do with that data or what the data means to us, right? So here we can see that there was a set of data that's a quality control check. So we're going to use this as quality control. You can see there's a lot of stuff that we're not going to use and we're ultimately going to delete. And then we could see what we're most interested in down here. We have the employee's name and different labels for the different tasks in Excel that the employee was rating, right? So we have different worksheets. On each worksheet, we have data, and this worksheet tells us what the data on this worksheet means. Okay, so looking back at our list of tasks that we're going to try to get through, the remaining tasks in this video, tasks 3 through 6, are all about basically setting up a backup, right? A backup plan. As we're manipulating data, as we're working with data, we want to make sure that if we were to make a mistake, or if we just need to check whether everything looks right, we have a backup in place. So what we're actually going to do is create 2 copies of our Excel Comfort dataset. We're going to create 2 copies of this data here. One copy we're going to keep raw. We're not going to touch it at all. And then the other copy is the copy that we're going to manipulate and work on, right? Again, that way, if we make a mistake, we can always go back to our raw copy and fix things, right? Or if we just want to check on things, we can go back to our raw copy and make sure things look right. So task number 3 is to rename this Excel Comfort Dataset worksheet to something that's going to tell us that it's the raw file. We want to rename it raw. Okay, just like most things in Excel, there's multiple different ways we can rename things. One of the ways that we can rename a worksheet is if we hover our mouse over to the worksheet tab and we right click on our mouse, we get a pop-up menu, and one of the items on the pop-up menu is rename. If we select rename, we could see that the name of the worksheet has now become highlighted, and now we can just type in whatever name we want. Here we want to label this raw, so I'll type in raw, and then you can click enter on your keyboard, or you can just click anywhere with your mouse, and now we can see that our worksheet has been renamed raw. Just another quick way that you can rename is if you go down to your worksheet title and you just double click it on your mouse. Again, you'll get it to be highlighted, and again, you can rename it whatever you want. Okay, so step 3 was to rename this worksheet to raw. Step 4 is to create a copy of this worksheet. So we want an exact duplicate copy of this worksheet. Again, if we go down to if we hover our mouse over the worksheet title and we right click, again, we get this pop-up screen that tells us a whole bunch of helpful things we can do to this worksheet. And one of the options is move or copy. Okay, let's do this option because we want to not move, but copy, right? So I'll select move or copy, and a little Excel wizard pops up. This is a really helpful thing that we'll get used to running in Excel. We get these wizards that just kind of walk us through what we need to do. So here in the wizard, it's saying, do you want to create a copy? If we want to create a copy, we would just select this box here. And so this is telling Excel to create a copy. And then it's saying, well, where do you want to move that copy? Do you want to move it before the data labels sheet? Do you want to move it before the raw sheet, or do you want to move it to the end? Let's go ahead and just move it to the end. So I create a copy, move to end, and select OK. And now we can see that Excel has just created a carbon copy. So now we have two worksheets. And as I switch between the worksheets, you can't see any differences because they're exactly the same. And it also, just by convention, named the copy the same title with a number next to it. So this is raw number 2, right? So the next thing we want to do is we want to rename this copy instead of raw 2, we want to rename it working. And that'll tell us that this is the worksheet that we're actually working on and manipulating, right? And again, this is just sort of best practices. Now, the naming conventions, that's completely up to you, but generally best practices when you're analyzing data is that you always want to make a copy of your raw data and you want to work on a separate sheet of data, right? Okay, so again, I want to rename this. Again, I could either right click and go to rename, or I can double click. I'll just go to rename here, and we are going to rename this working. Now, the last step here in this set of steps is to make sure that the worksheets are in this order: data labels, raw, working. Well, fortunately for us, they are in this order, but if they weren't in this order and we wanted to move data, we wanted to move worksheets into a different order, we kind of have a couple of options. One option is we could right click and we could go to the move or copy pop-up, but this time we want to move, right? So here we don't want to create a copy. We just want to move the selected worksheet. And here we can tell Excel where we want to move it. So now we're trying to move the working sheet. Let's move it before data labels. So I'll just select data labels and then OK. And now you can see that Excel has moved the worksheet before the data labels. But remember, I actually want it back behind raw. I want data labels, then raw, then working. Another way we can move is if we just left click on the worksheet and grab. So here I'm going to left click and hold on working. And when I do this, I can see that my pointer there, my mouse pointer now looks like it's holding a worksheet. I could also see this little black arrow. And that's telling me right now I've grabbed this worksheet, and if I let it go, it's going to end up wherever that black arrow is. If I were to scan over here, I can see now if I let it go, it's going to end up before data labels. If I move it over here, now if I let it go, it would end up before raw. And if I move it over here, now if I let it go, it's going to end up after raw, right where I want it. So I can let it go now, and now I got my worksheets in the right order. So that's steps 1 through 6. Now what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to save this file here to your computer and move on to the next set of steps.